Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so please let's just give 5 minutes as usual for others to join us. Then we continue. Good evening, everyone. If you can hear me, you're welcome to class. You're welcome to today's class. If you're just joining and in case you've forgotten to write your name in the attendance, please, you should do so. And today's class is going to be on the Nigerian Constitution and citizens' rights. And I'm going to briefly read the profile for our facilitator for today, right? So our facilitator today is Uchechi. She's a legal practitioner with a key focus on technology law and regulatory compliance. She serves as a legal consultant to the foremost inter-country adoption agency in Nigeria, Life Foundation, BBC News Nigeria, and the Electoral College. She's the head legal consultant of Zoe Legal, a corporate, commercial, and startup legal advisory firm in Lagos State. She has worked with several local and international bodies on fintech, telecommunications, employment law, and immigration. In addition to her legal practice, she's very keen on public advocacy and the education of Nigerian youth on politics and governance. She serves in the Electoral College as the Deputy Director of Lagos State. Uchechi is called to the Nigerian bar and has obtained an LLM in international commercial law from the University of Hertfordshire. She runs a podcast called Zoe Legal, where she speaks on legal issues and is keen on using her platform to encourage awareness and education among the masses. Please, with a warm round of applause, I know that I can't hear you. Please, let's welcome our facilitator for today, Miss Uchechi. Ma, if you can hear us, you have the floor, ma.
Thank you. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. It is a pleasure to be with the Electoral College. This is home for me. And again, I'm always very amazed at how much we are consistent and the team as well. So well done to every one of you. And to the current students, I can assure you that you're in the best place and you're getting quality education. So as much as possible, take this as a very good platform. And I'll encourage you to go through all the courses and you'll be better for it. All right, so my topic is the rights of the Nigerian citizen, and as it entails or as it talks about political rights and civil rights as well. So this is just the content of what I'm going to be talking about. I'll give an overview of what rights are. I'll also talk about the legal framework of citizens' rights in Nigeria, and I'll talk briefly about the Nigerian Constitution, and we'll delve a little bit into the political rights as well as the voters' rights in Nigeria. Okay, so I'll just start by asking a little question. I know that it's sort of like a facilitation, but as much as possible, I want to hear a bit of communication from you. So we all hear about rights. We all know what rights is, or we imagine that we know what rights is. But can someone put in very clear terms, or I would say a layman's term, what the definition of a right is? Like if you're chatting to someone and the person's like, you know what, I know my rights, what does that really mean? Anybody, you can unmute and say.
Okay, so I think anyone who wants to speak can just indicate by raising up their hand, then I will ask the person to unmute and speak.
Okay, we have Busayo.
I've asked him to unmute.
Good evening, Ma. So, thank you. So you said in the simplest language. So to me,
Yes.
rights of a citizen will be what a person in Nigeria is normally entitled to in a Nigerian citizen.
Okay. So what's your entitlements are as it pertains to your citizenship in Nigeria? Okay. Anyone else? We'll just take one more and then we'll proceed. Okay, very quiet class. All right, so yes, entitlement is correct. Rights is really just your entitlement to have something or to do something, right? So if someone says, I know my right, or it's my right to do something, or you're going against my right, that means that that person understands what is due to them, right? So if you're in a society, or if you travel from one place, one jurisdiction to another, that can also determine what rights you have. Some people in Nigeria, when they go to the US, you know, their rights are sort of reimagined or rewind, I would say, right? So because you're in a particular jurisdiction, there are certain entitlements or certain duties or obligations that pertain to you. If you move from that society to another society, those rights may either shorten or increase as well. So rights and obligations pretty much go hand in hand, right? So if you exist in a society, you have rights and you also have obligations as well. So your rights will most likely stop where another person's right starts. So when your right stops, it means that you now have an obligation to that other person and to, you know, the society, the state government, to your neighbor, your community, right? So in Nigeria, you have certain basic entitlements to some services, to some provisions, and some, you know, things that the government could afford you just based on the fact that you are a Nigerian citizen. Now, flowing from rights, now we should touch a little bit on the rule of law, because you can't really have a democratic society, which is what we are currently operating here in Nigeria, without speaking on the basis of the rule of law. Because if you just have rights, right, citizens' rights, without any sort of checkmates or any sort of control or any sort of system of checks and balances, it would probably erupt into an anarchy. So the rule of law is essentially the vehicle for protecting and promoting the common rights narrative within a society. It is that structure through which you exercise the powers that be, you agree on certain rules, and you also guarantee the protection of the human rights within that society, right? There are various instruments of implementing the rule of law. We have the Constitution, we have the court system, you know, we have the acts from the legislation, you know, we have bills and things of that nature. You can just go back to the other slide. Let me just touch a little bit on the concept of the rule of law. Now, we have ideals such as independence of the judiciary, autonomy of the judiciary. We have the principles such as the superiority of the law, separation of powers, equal application of law, accessible enforcement, rights pathway, things like all of these elements are what ensures that the rights of a citizen within a society is protected. Now, to the extent at which each of these principles of the rule of law is maintained within a society is the extent at which that society can be truly said to be democratic. Now, if you look at a system such as Nigeria, would you say that the law is indeed supreme? Or would you say that there are people who are, you know, more supreme than the law? Or would you say that there is indeed separation of powers between the legislative arm, the executive arm, and the judiciary arm? Is there equal application? It doesn't matter what my status is in Nigeria. Would you do for me the same thing that you do for the common man on the streets? Are the laws even just? Are they robust enough? Robust in the sense that is it also updated, right? Does it cover for every circumstance, right? For instance, we have the introduction of the fintech system and fintech organizations, right? Cryptocurrency, I mean, that's a very recent thing that people are talking about, right? Do our laws robust enough to cover for all of these new nuances like the AI. You know, we have so many things coming up. Our laws robust enough? Is the judiciary really independent, right? All of these things are debatable. Obviously, these are ongoing arguments, right? So to the extent at which each of these principles are upheld within a society, you can say that they're truly practicing a democratic system of government, but that's also debatable in Nigeria. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So, all right, we talked about rights. We have legal rights, we have social rights, and we have all sorts of rights, really. You have the rights of the child, we have the rights of the women's rights, really. And some of these rights are generic, right? Some of these rights are also entrenched within our Constitution. Some not necessarily entrenched within our Constitution, but there are some of the universal rights that we have ratified within our structure as a Nigerian society, right? So in essence, we're now governed by them, right? So I put here that rights are legal, social, or ethical principles of freedom or entitlement. That is, rights are the fundamental normative rules about what is allowed of people or owed to people according to some legal system, social convention, or ethical theory. All right. So essentially, there's no rule of law within societies if humans are not protected by these rights. So of course, you have to have a proper legal framework that takes care of each of these rights of citizens. Now we're talking about the Electoral Act. We're talking about our governance structures. We're talking about our rights as citizens, you know, our political rights. So I'm going to just narrow this down to what the conversation is about. So obviously, we have the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We would call this in law as the grand norm of all laws, right? So all other laws are voidable to the extent at which they are inconsistent with the Constitution. So as much as possible, all laws try to be, you know, one and in one accord, in agreement with the Constitution. Obviously, we have the Electoral Act, regulations and guidelines for the conduct of elections. We also have international instruments. We also have regional human rights, the AU, and all of these other instruments that we have ratified into our system. So you can move to the next slide. Okay, this is a bit tiny, so we'll just go over it. So I just took the liberty to mention some of the ratified instruments that we can boast about in Nigeria that we ratified into our Constitution or into our laws. So that means that we're governed by them. Some of them pertain to racial discrimination, cultural rights, political rights, civil rights as well. So some of them were ratified a long time ago. So obviously we are practicing this as Nigerians, or would say that our laws recognize these instruments, these international instruments. So let's just move on to the next slide because that's a bit tiny. Okay, so civil and political rights are essentially a class of rights that protect individuals' freedom from infringement from governments, social organizations, and private individuals. It ensures your ability to participate within the civil and political life of a state without any form of discrimination or repression, right? Civil rights include, you know, ensuring that people's physical and mental integrity, life and safety are maintained. You're also protected from any sort of discrimination, maybe by basis of your gender, your national origin, your color, sexual orientation, you know, all of these things, right? These rights essentially protect you and ensure that, you know what, you can participate freely as a member of that society. Now, because I am a Nigerian, I have certain rights that a non-Nigerian will not necessarily have. I have the right to vote in an election, right? I have a right to join a political party. I have a right to run for office. I have a right to also be tried and be, I have a right to a fair trial in Nigeria. I have a right to participate freely in political rallies and all the likes. Someone who is not a Nigerian may not necessarily enjoy that same right. So these are some of the things that we sort of take for granted. I understand, because of the political temperature and the way things are, people do not really, value these rights. But in another society, these rights are not joked. They don't joke with their rights to vote in an election, because you're essentially having the power to choose. I know saying this, I'm even laughing because I know that it sounds gimmicky, knowing the system of law that we have. But really, the right to vote is a very powerful right. The right to choose your leader is a right to vet and also determine who takes your society to the next level, who determines what rules, what governs that society, who makes the decisions, who speaks for your society as well. Is a right that is very personal to every citizen. And I know that where we are right now it leaves a little to be desired with our voters card and all of those things. But in an ideal world, it's a very powerful tool to determine the course of a society, especially in a democratic system. I mean, we have government systems that are still practicing autocracy and socialism, communism, and these are people that long for, dream of, having this kind of democratic, system, to be able to determine who leads them. But yes, so these are some of the civil and political rights that accrue to a Nigerian citizen. And yeah, it's important that you're aware of it. All right. Okay, so we already talked about this. Civil rights also extend to your freedom of speech and expression. And obviously, like I mentioned earlier, your right stops where another person's right starts. So if you say you have freedom of speech, obviously you cannot now defame people or be libelous or be verbally abusive, because now you're not infringing on another person's right, and you are liable to be sued and to pay the repercussion for doing that. So obviously all of these rights, they all have their limits as well. The right to assemble and the right to movement. I mean, you can go anywhere you choose to as a Nigerian, but obviously you cannot trespass in private estates or private owned lands, right? There's a right to religion, there's a right to gather, and all of these things. But again, if there is a threat to the society, for instance, when we had the COVID issue, obviously we had to regulate, movement, because obviously your right to maybe assemble obviously would be detrimental to the society at large. So sometimes states would put maybe a state of emergency even if there's a threat to the society. So I said all that to say that the rights are not, they're not all-encompassing. They're not, what's that? There's a word I'm missing, but I'm sure you understand what I mean. The rights they have limits, they have extent, and your right also stops where another person's right starts. So it's always important to bear that in mind. Can move to the next slide. Okay, so political rights, as much as we like to talk about, the right to vote and all of these things, some of these rights also include, okay, I would say these are actually procedural in nature, especially when it comes to maybe a litigation or you have a matter in court, right? You have a right to fair trial, due process, right to seek redress or legal remedy. Obviously, some people don't know that, you can actually, walk into you don't even necessarily need a lawyer, to be honest, right? You can represent yourself, right? But except it's like a very technical issue, then you probably would be assigned a lawyer in court. But you actually have a right to seek redress, walk into the court and seek redress, as long as you are, someone with a full consciousness and you have your full thinking capacity, right? You can actually seek redress or a legal remedy. Obviously, it's subject to the procedure of the courts and all of those things. You also have a right to participate in civil societies, politics, freedom of association, right to assemble, right to petition as well, and right to self-defense, and the right to vote, which we all know. So I think we're just going to take a quick look at some of these rights in the Constitution. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. So just before we look into the Constitution, obviously, I like to ask, some of these critical questions, which I'm sure you already have thought about. Before we look into the Constitution, would you say that human rights are really respected in Nigeria? Would you say that the common man, really has rights in Nigeria? Would you say that your human rights are understood and well protected within your country? Would you also say that the justice system have the will? By will, I mean, do they have the liberty or the independence to actually treat these issues of human rights without fear or favor, right? And that goes to the rule of law when it comes to the autonomy of the judiciary. Would you also say that Nigeria as a society has a proper institutional framework to tackle and grapple with human rights abuses, right? Because again, it's not just about knowing your rights or knowing how to access it, but even after you have gotten maybe a favorable judgment, are there things in place that you can say, okay, I'll probably go to the bailiff or the executor or whatever it is, or the ombudsman, all of this is, do we really have a proper framework to grapple with the human rights abuses? For instance, the police now, I know a couple of colleagues who have lamented so much about how, they say bail is free, but you always have to pay something. And I mean, even if you go to the police station now and you want to maybe report a case, it's never just a one and done thing. It's always one thing or the other. I had a friend who was wrongfully accused of, some fraudulent activities, and she went to the police, to actually report, and she ended up behind bars. It was just a very tricky situation, but these are some of the things that we should actually look into, right? And again, power does not just lie with the president. All the other institutions that are spread across the society, they have a role to play. And if these things are not in place, right, it's going to be a really long journey, even if the head is functional, right? If the other smaller ministries or setups are not properly structured, it's going to be a really, really long journey for a country like ours, right? So does the Nigerian government know what human rights even are and tenets of democracy are? I mean, these are some questions that we can ponder on. All right, so we're just going to have a look at each of the rights that we have, just very briefly. So one, freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, found in section 38 of the Constitution. So essentially, this is your right to free thinking, free conscience, free religion. Again, you're free to participate in or be a member or sign up to the ideology of any political party by your own right? I mean, I see a lot of people get bullied essentially for being, part of or believing or choosing to identify with a political party. It's actually quite would I say, an ignorant thing to do. It's just that in Nigeria, our political parties are not really governed by ideologies. But I know that in the West, if you say that you are part of a political party, if you say that you're a liberal or a conservative, there are implied things that you can, even though now it's a bit intertwined, but there are implied things that you can just say, okay, so you believe this, you believe this about maybe abortion or same-sex marriage, or there are some very key things that some parties, that's their ideology. But in Nigeria, if you say that you're maybe an NNDPP person, you probably need to explain further why that's your party, because we're not really huge on, or we haven't really fully established ideologies when it comes to political parties. But again, you still have people who would go to bat for their choices. And I think that everyone should be encouraged, right? Again, it's important to also question people, put it to people, right? You say you're part of this party. Why? Because you will find out that some people don't even know why. They're just moving along with the crowd or just going where whatever perceived money is, right? Sometimes you just engage people. So you say you're part of this party. So why exactly did you choose this party? What are their ideologies? What do you believe in? You know, who is your, whose mandate are you following and what's in that mandate? So it's always important to engage in this conversation so that people actually, their eyes are open to what they're following or what they're participating in. Okay, so next. All right, so rights to freedom of expression and the press. So obviously this has to do with, you know, expressing your views, even criticizing the government as well. I mean, it's a democratic government, and this is one key area where I think that the opposition parties need to also step up in, right? Because more often than not, we always feel that at the end of, I hope I'm clear, at the end of every election, you know, it's done, everyone goes home, and we just end up, you know, just lamenting and we don't really do anything. Well, there's actually still work to be done. I love how, I don't know who follows the Canadian political news, but there's always a debate. There's always something going, you know, the president knows that he cannot rest on his laurels because the opposition criticizes, picks them apart, and they know that, you know, I am being called to order, and I cannot just sleep on my laurels because there are hawks watching. I was scrolling on LinkedIn the other day, and I saw that Peter Obi actually, he's always putting up things. You know, he's always talking. I think that's really what an opposition should be doing. He's always talking about, you know, policies, what's going on here. He's always criticizing. I think he quite understands a lot about opposition, and even if you lost an election, you know, it doesn't mean that that's the end for you. You still have the watchdog role within a society to express, criticize, talk about the government, as long as it is not anything inciting any kind of what's it called, overthrow of a government, because that would then be treasonable offense. But as an opposition, you still have a role to look, you know, watch the ruling party, talk about it, criticize, you know, go on press and on things like that, but always within the context of the law as well. So yeah, freedom of expression and the press. All right, so also have rights to peaceful assembly and association. So just what I want to say here is, obviously, you know, like I said, your right starts with another person's right stop. You have a freedom to assemble anywhere and associate with anyone, but again, it has to be within the confines of the law. You cannot assemble for terrorism, or you cannot assemble for cultism, or, you know, trying to, you know, brandish some deadly weapons and things like that. And I think that in some areas as well, you probably need to get a kind of permit, right? A police permit to have like a protest or a maybe a march or something, because obviously people are using the roads. If it's a public space, people would need to commute as well. So yes, you have a right to assemble peacefully in your homes, in your private spaces. But if it has to do with a public gathering, perhaps just get to know, okay, what does it take to gather, and do I need a kind of permit or anything, or is there a time limit or something? So yeah, we have a right to peaceful assembly and association. You can associate with any political party that you choose to associate with. You can have rallies, you can have meetings, you can have meetups and things like that. All right, so rights to freedom of movement. Yes, you can move to any part of Nigeria as long as you have the Nigerian citizenship. You can move to any part of Nigeria. You can even reside in any part of Nigeria. But, you know, I guess because of some of the insecurities that occur in some states, there's probably like a state of emergency or a bar on movements at a certain time. So that also should be taken cognizance of. But yes, you have a freedom of movement, freedom to even buy property or land anywhere. So yes, that's one of the rights that you have as a citizen in Nigeria. Okay, right to freedom from discrimination. Yes, a very important right, because I think it was in Lagos where, you know, some people were being discriminated against because of their ethnicity and sometimes even because of your sex or religion. You know, there's all of these conversations that go on. But I mean, as long as you're a Nigerian, as long as, you know, you are a citizen, you know, you have the right to exist and participate freely in any political assembly or any political thing going on. It's quite sad actually that we're still talking about something as simple as ethnicity and, you know, culture and all of these things. But nobody should be discriminated against by basis of where they were born or who they were born from, or, you know, their what's it called, states or wherever. You know, I think you can also, not I think, you can even participate in an election within any state. In an election, and, you know, move freely. You shouldn't be discriminated against based on that as well. Yes, like I said, you have the right to acquire and own immovable property anywhere in Nigeria. I know that that's quite self-explanatory. Okay, so we're just going to look at the INEC regulations and guidelines for the conduct of an election. So this is basically your core rights as your core political rights as a you know, card carrying, or sorry, a voter's card, a registered voter in Nigeria. Sorry, these are your core rights as explained in the INEC regulations. So you have a right to register. As long as you're a Nigerian, you have a right to register to vote and be voted for as well. This right is also covered under the Constitution, right? But, you know, there are some instances where obviously you have a right to register, but you're not going to be registering all year long, because the Commission also has its guidelines, right? They would always tell you when the registration is open, where you should register, and, you know, how you should collect it. I mean, the last election, it was done a bit shabbily, but I mean, I guess it's a step up from where we were coming from. But yes, definitely you have a right to register to vote. Also, the communication has to be made public. So INEC cannot hide the communication as to when registration is open or where locations are. They always have to make it public, and they do that as much as they can, right? So you have the right to vote and be voted for, as long as you have satisfied all the requirements of the law to be an eligible voter, right? So like I mentioned, all Nigerian citizens that are above the age of 18 are eligible for that. And as long as you also possess a valid voter's card, you have the right to turn up in any polling units between the times that have been stated and on an election day to vote. And you must also, of course, fulfill the legal requirements. And this vary also, especially when you are contesting for the election. It varies from office to office. If it's a governor or a president or a House of Assembly member, there are different stipulations for each member. So you also have to take cognizance to that. You also have a right to recall an elected representative. Well, this is pretty much talking about the the remedies that voters have after an election, because most often than not, after an election, we just feel like, you know what, what's done is done. We can't do anything about it, right? But you actually have a right to recall an elected representative. To recall means to summon back or to withdraw the mandates given to an elected legislator through an election. As long as they were elected, they were not appointed. You can recall that candidate. And you can do that for a Senate elected member, a House of a Representative elected member, and a House of Assembly elected member. And that's done by the voters of the affected constituency. So you have to make sure that you're within that constituency that that elected member was voted. You also have a right to privacy when voting. I heard in the last election as well, people were being forced to talk about or tell, you know, where or who they voted for. That's absolutely wrong and against the law. You're actually supposed to have a private setup when you're voting, because who you vote, is your business and it's no other person's business as well. So yes, again, it's very fraught with a lot of dangers and all of these things. So you usually have security agencies around there, but yes, you have a right to that. Lastly, it's not mentioned on the slide, but you have a right to attend rallies, campaigns, political parties. You have a right to support and even support financially as well. There's nothing wrong with that. It's also very important to allow people the freedom to choose who they want to govern them. You also have a right to information about an election, right? Information about an election should be publicly stated. It should be published on public platforms as well. Information such as date, time, procedure, venue, things like that is your right to know about that. So in conclusion, before I take any questions, if you have any, obviously, the Nigerian constitution, I know there's a lot of criticism about the constitution and whether it's even good enough, but I'll say that as it is, it actually quite covers very broadly our fundamental human rights as it is. The problem is not so much the constitution or the book of laws or the regulations and the acts that we have. I would say it's probably the people who are governing us. They're I'll actually change my mind on this. I would say that they know the law. It is us who are not aware of what accrues to us, right? Because I'm sure that before you get elected, you will actually study the law and know what accrues to you. But if we are not aware, the elected leaders are able to use that ignorance and do whatever they want to do. But yes, the problem is also a problem of implementation. Fine, they know the law, but is it implemented? Are the things in the law actually being implemented as is, or is there some arbitrary, activity going on? Obviously, this will affect everyone at large. And also, lastly, for any development to take place, the government must always find a way to marry democracy, rule of law, and human rights. If not, there's no foundation whatsoever. If there's no rule of law, there's no foundation at all. And if there's no proper principle of rule of law and respect of those principles, right, there's a lot to be said about whether or not we're actually operating a democratic system. Well, yes, that's all from me. I hope I was audible enough, and I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ma, for that. Thank you so much. We're really grateful, and it's always exciting and nice having you come teach us. Okay, so it's now time for questions. So if you have any questions, you can indicate by raising up your hand, and if you're where it's not going to be convenient for you to speak, then you can use the chat box and drop your questions. We'll be shuffling between those raising their hands and the questions in the chat box. So please, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand, indicate by raising up your hand. Okay, Musa Salihu, please, you can unmute and ask your question. I've asked you to unmute. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. My question goes by the way. I want the presenter please to differentiate. Is there? She made mention of freedom of speech, but there are some restrictions that the government or the some security personnel do use to, or there are some roles that security personnel used to play at times. Some a person might be expressing his freedom of speech or freedom of thought or against something, then he may be prosecuted or he may be held responsible for some things that he said. So I need more highlight. There's freedom of speech, but regarding the limitations, are there limitation to respect to freedom of speech? Because at times somebody might mention of something or might organize a protest. At the end of the day, he may end up at jail or somewhere about. So please, I need more clarification with respect to that, because I know there are a lot of scenarios here in my locality in Kano, because it reaches to an extent that you can't even speak against government. You should either follow their way, or there is either their way or no way in terms of politics that they do play here in my locality. So I don't know. I need more clarification with respect to the freedom of speech.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Musa Salihu. I think that's a really good question. So like I said earlier, rights they're not unlimited, right? They have their restrictions, they have their limitations, and depending on the society that you're in, it would also influence that limitation and how much you can exercise that right. Say for instance, in a place like China, like the freedom of speech is so limited that I think WhatsApp is not even allowed in China or something. There's a serious ban on some communication. A place like North Korea, that you can't even have internet in some cases. Now in Nigeria, I would say generally, it is implied that we operate a democratic society. So
Am I the only one who can't hear our facilitator? Is it just me? Please, someone should help me confirm.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think
yes,
her network
okay.
is functional.
Okay, so
and just
let's.
hello.
Okay, yes, ma, you can go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Or just applying pressure on the government and just calling them back to what the expectation is, or drawing their attention. Obviously, using civil words, right? You can't like. I mean, people do it anyway on social media, make fun of the government and all of this. And to be honest, they're within their rights, because it's nothing tyrannical or it's nothing treasonable. Right. Treason it starts to be treasonable when there was a time, I don't know if you guys remember, there was a time where some group of people were talking about Biafra, something. That's actually quite, towing the line of treason, because now you're trying to reinstate or replace or an already existing government. That's actually quite treasonable. So things like that, or saying that you want to overthrow the government or planning a coup. I mean, those are quite extreme, but I would say those are the limits to freedom of speech. Also, if your speech is defamatory in nature, defamatory in the sense that you are telling lies, or you're accusing someone of something they did not do, right? Or libelous, as you're writing things that are false or making false accusations or, things like that. Those I would say are obviously a limit. Those are the limits to your freedom of speech. Now, I will agree with you, Musa, that again, we don't have an ideal society. Obviously is not ideal by a stretch, right? So I think I understand where you are coming from when you say that sometimes it can seem a bit arbitrary, especially I would say maybe in the north, I would say it can get a bit arbitrary. But I'll tell you that that's probably not constitutional, right? But also would also have to look at the nitty-gritties and the terms of the speech and what exactly is being said and why the government feels like they can clamp on the people. But yeah, so those are the limits on the freedom of speech.
Okay, thank you so much, Ma, for that. Do we still have any questions? Anyone with a question or questions? Okay, so I think that will be all. Okay, we have Jessica. You can unmute and speak. I've asked you to unmute, Jessica.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, and thanks to our speaker. You really touched some things that have been bothering me. So I want to ask, I don't know if it's a silly question, I don't really know much about this, so let me just ask you since you're the pro. Our civil rights as citizens, does it, how do I put this? In some states of Nigeria, especially the northern states, they make their own laws for their citizens if you're in the state. So your right as a citizen, does it cancel out? I don't know the right word to use, so let me just say that. Does it cancel out when you're living in such a state? Does the law of the state supersede your human rights? Let me put it that way. Does it make sense? I don't know if I'm expressing my questions properly.
Yes, it does. It does. I think I understand what you're saying. So because of the federal system of government that we operate, right? You have what we call separation of powers, of all the organs of government. You have the organs of government, and we have the different so you have the state government, you have the local government, and then you have the federal government. And then within these government, should I say, structures, there are laws that are either the terms for it, sorry, is actually going over me. There are concurrent things that they can adjudicate on, and there are things that are solely for either the state government or the federal government. For instance, when it comes to the topic of marriage comes under the federal system, right? When it comes to, for instance, let me say the right of a child, right? It comes under the state government. Now, because Nigeria has already ratified the rights of a child, the international rights of a child, it now behoves on each state to ratify it as law within that state. So you find that something like the Child Rights Act is a law in Lagos State because Lagos State has ratified it. But if you go further to the north, you realize that because they already have a law that is contravenous to the Child Rights Act, it's sort of not is not of general application in the north because it contravenes, I think it's the Sharia law, I'm not quite sure. So because of the system of government that we run, there are matters that are exclusive, there are matters that are concurrent, and the matters that are residual, right? So things like arms, bearing arms, that's a federal right, or the army, military, paramilitary, all of those are the exclusive of the federal government. Then you find things like marriage, internal road structures, things like ministerial affairs, women affairs, is escaping my mind, but there are things that are concurrent that they can both adjudicate on. And then there are things that are residual, right? So it's just for either the local government or the state government to bear. So not necessarily that your human rights, if it comes in contact with the state's laws, it would supersede, or the state laws would supersede it. But you have to determine what exactly are we talking about? What's the topic, right? Is it within the concurrent jurisdiction or the residual or the exclusive jurisdiction? Then you now narrow it down to whether our laws actually cover for it. Are those justiciable rights, for instance? Right? Is this something that you can go to court for? Is this something that you can actually report? And then you now talk about, do we have the structure for it? Because if you look at the US, which is like a very established government and system of structure and all of those things, very little things like someone coming to put something in front of your shop, you can easily, sue the person for it. But here it'll be like, do you not have work to do? Are you lazy? Are you bored? Our systems are not as robust as a Western system. But I would say by and large, we actually still do have a structure that we can work with, right? So these are little things that you just need to understand. I know rights, you say you have your rights, you have all of these rights, right? But you also have to narrow it down to, okay, I have this right, but the state at which I live in, right? Is it actually a practicable right within that state? And if it is practicable, right, where does it fall under? Is it a state right, or is it, do you get what I mean? I hope I'm making sense. Or you can also give me an example of, the kind of human right that you're talking about, and let's actually dissect it and know if it's actually something that falls within the decision of the society that you live in. But by and large, those are the key things that you need to dissect when you're actually looking into each of these rights. Okay, thank you, Jessica.
Okay, Jessica, are you okay? Okay, I've seen your reply. So we have another question in the chat box, and the question says, what's the law regarding a citizen using his phone to video in court during police arrest, in the police station, during police arrest, in the police station, in the military barracks, etc.?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. So the courts it is a public place, actually. It's a public place, but sometimes there are regulations depending on the kind of case that is being carried on at the particular time, right? I mean, court documents are public documents, actually. You can actually apply to court and say, oh, I'd like to get the report on this case, and it is yours for the taking, right? But there are some cases, for instance, when it has to do with a child, a minor, that has to be done in closed court because of the age of that child. And there are some cases as well that perhaps for matters of national security as well, you are barred from actually recording or taking notes. So you just have to know the kind of case it is, and also if that particular court allows for it. I mean, it doesn't hurt to ask. It actually doesn't hurt to ask. But by and large, a court is a public place, and you should be able to, take a recording, because I mean, the proceeds from the courts, the record of the courts is public as well. So you should be able to actually record it. In the police station, again, depends on why you're recording. I mean, if you're going there to sort of be aggressive and incite trouble, right? In prison, obviously not. You shouldn't even have your phone in prison, right? In the military barracks, obviously not. The military is very, very heavily regulated, and as much as possible, you're not allowed to take records in the military barracks. But I know that in the police station, again, if you're just going there to maybe take a case down, yes, you should be able to record it for record purposes. But I always advise people, if you're going to the police station, go with a lawyer who would at least advise you on what is applicable to you and what covers your rights. So yeah, that's what I would say. But absolutely not in the military barracks. That's a very regulated jurisdiction. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So
Thank you.
Abraham just asked the question. You mentioned that every citizen has the right to defend his or herself in court, except on technical cases. Please, what is the procedure to seek redress without a lawyer, and how to defend yourself in court? You actually have a right to defend yourself on all matters, right? Except the case is such that you are unable to defend yourself. It might not even have to be a technical case, right? Except it's that which you're unable. For instance, if you're a minor, you obviously need a guardian, or if you are not of cohesive capacity, or you don't, if maybe your thinking faculties are not, all in order, right? Or maybe you don't understand the language and all of these nuances, you definitely need a support there. The procedure to seek redress is the same thing with someone with a lawyer. You go to courts, meet the court's workers there. Oh, that you want to do a civil matter, or not a criminal matter. A criminal matter, you absolutely need to have someone defending you. You can actually defend yourself. I wouldn't advise that. You can actually defend yourself in a criminal matter, but I wouldn't advise that. But yes, walk into court, request for the forms, request for the documentation, you fill it yourself, write out your application and file. But again, it's quite technical because your matter can be struck out because you're not following the proper procedure. But if you're able to read the law books and see exactly what is required of you, you can do that. But again, it's still quite dicey, but you can do it if you want to. I know people who have defended themselves in courts.
Okay. So thank you so much, we have another question from Ahmed. Ahmed, you can unmute and ask your question.
Hello?
Hi.
Okay, my question goes on the right to religion. Oh, let me put it in some way. Like in Nigeria, we have the Muslim and the Christianity and other religion that is like pagan or something. I'm sorry to call it that way. I don't know how to put it in other words. Like pagans, some of their things that they are doing within the religion, maybe some that require sacrifice, some witchcraft, and a lot of things. So, does that give a man or human being the right to participate in this kind of religion as far as it is a religion? And they are doing a lot of things that are taboo to normal society now.
Yeah. That's a really great question. Thank you, Ahmad, for asking that. So again, rights do not exist in a vacuum, right? I mean, there are human rights, but then there are other rights as well. Like you can't kill someone because you say you have a right to religion and all of those things, right? You can't take over someone's property because you want to have your religious gathering and things like that. So obviously, all of these rights are subject to other provisions of the law. They're subject to other provisions of the law. But yes, you have the freedom. Sorry? Oh, okay. You have the right to participate in a religious organization as long as you are capable of making that decision. Now, if you're below the adult age, and you're still a child, obviously, you would probably need a guide or a guardian to make that decision for you. If it's something that you have to sign up for and maybe be contractually bound to, that contract would be void, because a child cannot enter into any sort of contract without a guardian that is involved. But I mean, if you're a grown adult and you're obviously not being deceived or there's no misrepresentation, you're allowed to participate in any form of association or religion that you want to participate in, as long as you're not being coerced or being forced. But again, whatever you do in that religious organization has to be within the confines of the law. You cannot go around killing people. You'll be tried, you'll be held for murder, you'll be held for assault, you'll be held for battery and all of these things. So it's still subject to the other laws as we have it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ma. And I can see that you have attended to all questions. We don't have any other questions again in the chat box or anyone raising his or her hand. So I think with these, we have come to the end of today's class. I'll just give you a few minutes to round off, give us your concluding words and round up for today. That's one.
Oh, thank you so much, Dukas Peace. I just want to say thank you to the college. I really appreciate being called up on every single time. And I see the great work that is being done here. I encourage everyone to participate even after you have graduated from the college. You know, it's a very wonderful family to be part of. There's always something going on. There's always something to learn, and they're great people to learn from. I see Maureen and who else do I recognize? Okay, I don't know anyone else. All right. Lisa as well. Lisa, obviously. Thank you so much, everyone. I encourage you to take this outside of here as well. Participate in your communities. You may not be even going for an office, right? But if you know someone who is going and you know the person is trustworthy, you know, put your backing on them and support them. Be vocal about your political views, educate yourself, argue intelligently, and don't give up. Don't give up. This is our country. We have no other country. Even if you run, you still have to come back one day, and your children will still be Nigerians, right? So I encourage everyone, and thank you so much, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ma. So we have come to the end of today's class. Just to remind us, class still continues tomorrow. We are going to continue tomorrow at 5. And as you can see, attendance is really poor for today. I don't know what happened. So we can as well remind our other party members, right, our other mates to be in class tomorrow. And again, please, as we always say, you get knowledge here. Try as much as possible to step it down. Knowledge gained without execution or putting it into use is useless. So try as much as possible to put what you're learning into practice. And of course, I believe that we're gearing up for election next week. And then by this time, our assignments for the week has already been submitted, right? So with this, I want to say thank you to the college for another opportunity to moderate class. And from me, from this end, I don't know if there's any announcement from any admin. Chalia, are you here?
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Dukas. I don't know if there's anything from the DED. Okay, all right. We'll continue class tomorrow again. Thank you very much, man. Thank you very much, Dukas, for the beautiful moderation. It was very interesting, and we're able to pick up a lot when it comes to STEAM participation. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I can see someone asking in the chat box, you mentioned step down. Are we allowed to replicate SIM at our various locations? Why not? Of course, you should be able, but please ensure that what you're giving out is the right knowledge. What you're giving out is true, right? So let's try as much as possible to step down. That's the essence. If each one can reach one, then each one can teach one. Please, let's spread the good news and then let's teach others, right? So I saw Godwin. Okay, Godwin, please, you can quickly unmute, and I don't know why you're raising your hand, but I've asked you to unmute.
Okay, good evening. Thank you very much for the class. I'm not asking a question to the facilitator. I'm asking a question to the college. we were given a project to handle, and I expect some kind of clarification. I tried to contact one of the coordinators on my party platform, and she told me he told me it was the first time something like this was being done. So I need some clarification on the possible projects we could handle and what really we can do about the project. Thank you.
Okay, please let me answer that question. Hi,
Go ahead,
please. Let me take that question. Yeah, I even wanted to talk about the project earlier. Okay, so everyone, for the project, you have the liberty to choose what you want to do. For example, you can choose to maybe go to a school and teach them about a bit of what you've learned, polyteracy, and any knowledge that you feel they'll be able to assimilate at their level in a broken down form. Or you could decide to do it online. You could organize maybe a symposium of a sort online, an event, a conference, something, where you invite people and then you share this knowledge that you've learned so far. So basically, that's what it is. It's just a project to show that, yes, you truly learned and you're passing on the knowledge. Because in the electoral college, we are big on application. It's not just enough for you to come and learn, for you to go through the course. We want to see the change effected. We want to see other people also benefit from what, you've learned so far, what you've been taught so far. So that's the essence of the project. And please, for more clarifications, you can reach out to your team leads. I'm sure every party has a team lead. Yes, the parties left, you have your various team leads. And in cases where it needs to be escalated, I can be contacted, the ED can be contacted. So please, I will implore all of us to start working on the project. You have less than a month to go to your graduation. You're ending the course this month. Yes, before Easter. So you have less than a month to go. So it'll be wise for you to put heads together and start planning what you do. Like the ED said, this will constitute 30% of your total marks. So please take this serious. Thank you very much. If there are more questions, you can direct them to your team lead. And if it needs to get across to us, we'll definitely be available to answer. So I hope that gives you a bit of clarity. Godwin, I hope that gives you a bit of clarity. Whoever asked that question, Godwin, I think.
Already.
All
okay,
right.
he's
So thank you so much, Uchechi. Thank you so much. It was a short and insightful class. On behalf of the college, we're always grateful to have you share your knowledge with us. Thank you so much. So yeah, peace. You can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. And for Labour Party, I know you're lost, but I'm going to find you. Let's continue on the group chat. So thank you, everyone, for being here again. Please, let's have a restful night. Let's meet tomorrow.